Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Night. I am your host, Brian Smith, and today I'm going to give a little bit of a prognosis on some of the things that I think are going to happen, some of the players that I'm interested in seeing, and the overall theme of the UCF spring game this upcoming weekend on Saturday. With that, here are a couple of things that are most important to me, and forget the subpoints that I'm about to go through. Number one, let's hope we get through it healthy. That's always objective that every coach wants, but football is football. Number two, we need to see something that's definitively different from last year. Improvement, you need to see it with your eyes. I can look at statistics. I can watch a little bit of what they're doing in warm-ups and all that. But when the pads pop, that's the difference maker. You have to have players that are ready and willing to not only make plays, but do so consistently. And then finally, just the chemistry of the team. It's year two. Coach Malzahn and members of his staff have mentioned several times how it's easier. It's much easier because you're not installing everything. At least most of it is going to be regurgitated by the players because they've seen it before. Of course, that's a little bit different with some of the newbies, whether it's a transfer or whether it's an incoming freshman that enrolled early. But the majority of the staff is going to be working with guys for the second year. That really, really helps a football program. So with that, I've got a few things noted down here. This is not a rocket science thing, but it is incredibly important. I just mentioned chemistry. We can use that with everything I'm about to say. Chemistry can be mixed in with every single one of them because football, as a reminder, it's 11 guys trying to conquer one thing. That's very hard. The more chemistry, the more reps, the more likely you are to be successful. Let's start out with the thing that most people want to know about. Quarterback. Is it going to be JRP? Is it going to be Keene? Is it going to be a combination? Is there going to be somebody else that ends up getting reps? I don't know, but this is just my own prognosis. I think in some capacity, JRP will be the quarterback this fall, but he's so dynamic and so diverse in what he can do that you can implement him in different circumstances. But that chemistry thing I mentioned is my one concern. No matter how much you plan it, Chip Lindsey, Gus Malzahn, and the rest of the coaching staff, defensive coaches included, are going to have conversations that we're never going to hear about how do you think it'll go if we insert player A or player B into the quarterback position? How will it change the dynamic of the team chemistry? Who will accept it? Who will not? Who do we like? Who do we not like? Do we like both? And so do the players, which would be the greatest answer because then you can just make a decision. Don't kid yourself. Chemistry in a locker room based on quarterback play. You hear about it all the time in the NFL because they're always trying to create cliques, but it's true to a certain extent at the collegiate level as well. If you lose your locker room, even a small portion of it, because the guys don't feel comfortable with the quarterback behind center, you're going to lose. Chris Ricks, Florida State quarterback, I remember in the early 2000s, 20 years ago, he was highly touted. Everybody wanted him. Bowden wanted him more than anybody else, and he was only a junior at the time in high school out in California. Ended up committing. They just went with him. He ended up being the quarterback a couple years later, and he was terrible. His own center literally called him out publicly. Not a good sign. Needless to say, Florida State didn't do very well on a Ricks. They were a roller coaster. He'd have a good game here or there, but he threw picks, and sometimes he just missed badly, if you will, in regards to, shall we say, understanding what he should have been doing schematically. Players didn't respect him. Once they started losing the locker room, Florida State was in trouble, and they'd really deeply invested in him, and it just didn't work out. UCF's not in the same circumstance. Keene's an established player. He's getting better. I'm sure going through spring a second time is going to be a tremendous help to him. But John Rhys Plumlee is one of those guys that is a great fit for what Malzahn does traditionally. And Lindsey has shown that he can teach guys to throw the football. His first year at Troy had a pretty good quarterback, and they threw for a ton of yards. If they can get Plumlee going to the point where he could be, let's just say, 150 to 180 yards per game guy with their running ability in the back. I mean, their running back room is loaded. It's pretty easy to see how they could win 8 games pretty much just on raw talent. Their schedule is not daunting, but they do have 2 Power 5 teams coming in, and there are the good teams on the schedule, like SMU, like Cincinnati. If you do not play well at quarterback, you're going to lose any of those games in a heartbeat. My question is, do they really show their hand in the spring game? I'm guessing not. Gus he hates showing anything or talking about it. It's just his nature, and I get it. But at some point, he's got to have live bullets where it really, really matters. And part of live bullets is people in the stands. It is an opportunity for JRP as well as Mikey Keene to throw the football, which is the determining factor. If JRP can really throw, it's a non-decision here. He's the better runner by a landslide. He's one of the most phenomenal athletes in all of college football, regardless of position. He ran for 210 yards against LSU a few years ago. He's a freak athlete. If he can really throw under adverse circumstances where it's live bullets, where they're throwing with a blitz, a twist, a stunt, a guy coming at him, and he shows consistency, to me, that makes a pretty easy decision. I don't care what they've done. I know this is kind of crappy in a way to say, but if you've had a really good spring and you're Mikey Keene, but you get beaten badly in the spring game, hypothetically speaking here, of course, I'm looking at JRP because, again, he fits what Gus wants to do. That's just my opinion. I do expect Keene to be a little bit better in the following categories, though. Number one, his ability to make a decision quicker and release the football sooner. The one thing Gus, I forget the game, but it really got on him after a play. He met him 10 yards out onto the field. See, let a guy come across the middle. Didn't pull the trigger. He was wide open. It was a bust. That has to be automatic. That's the starting point. But there has to be a situation, if you're not a classic runner, and he is not, that you have to throw guys open. He can't just beat JRP in terms of throwing the football in this spring game. He has to annihilate him. If you're going to start him and or play him a lot, again, we don't know if it's going to be a 1 or a 2 quarterback system in the fall for the Knights. Keep that in mind. He has to completely defeat him in terms of passing. JRP is a guy that can play running back at UCF. He has that kind of physical skill. He can play receiver. He played receiver at Ole Miss. I mean, that tells you something. That's the SEC West. That is the just incredibly sickest division in all of college athletics. Every team has a good coach. Every team has a ton of NFL players, and they beat the heck out of each other. And he was running around like crazy. You have to be able to outthrow him. So with that, we're just going to have to wait and see. I don't have any projection on how it will go, but if they're going to really let those two guys be live and do everything, then we will know. Will he allow him to be live? I have no idea, but maybe they only do it part of the time. These spring games have some weird things they do, and part of it's due to injuries. Part of it's, avoiding injuries, and part of it is just, quite frankly, not showing your hand. The coaches, Gus, not by himself here, they hate film for the teams coming up, even in the fall. I have countless stories about that off the record with coaches. They're always worried about somebody getting an advantage on them, but whatever. Next on my list, and this is a playoff of quarterback, and it could be a lot of how the spring game ends up going, is the running back position and the receiver position and the tight end position. UCF is not struggling for talent at any one of those positions. Now, what can UCF do to maximize it? And again, not show everything, but like Gamble, the new tight end from Florida, you have to see what your new toy can do. You want to see what Johnny Richardson can do when he's running routes, etc. How do you maximize that without showing everything? I mean, there's some generic things you can do. Run a wheel route with Johnny, which everybody in the country that plays the Knights is going to know he's going to do at some point. Can you guard it? It's the bigger question. We will find out in the fall. But at the same time, how do they maximize in terms of execution? This is one of those things where, I'll tape some of the game just with my phone or whatever from the stands. I don't know how I'm going to do it yet. I'm going to be in the booth or how I'm going to do the whole game. But I just want to see them from a post-game situation, watching some of the film. How in the world do they execute in terms of working off each other with route combinations? Do they block if it's just a basic run to Bowser? Do the new guys really block like Hudson, Gamble, etc.? If they do that and they buy in, you have to buy into the team concept here. The skill guys can make that quarterback situation really, really unique because then there's a little bit more room for error. 2nd and 5 is better than 2nd and 6. That little extra effort on a block. It's not necessarily something that you can grade mathematically, although they try. They grade every play, but it's subjective. And all coaches do that. They should. They've got guys on the sidelines, charting everything, and they chart it afterwards, etc. But what's really unique is when you see that effort and then you see the energy after, you get a big 22-yard run for Johnny or Isaiah or Mark, anybody that, Mark gets the ball and he powers through, breaks a tackle. Does Hudson and some of the other players, do they really connect? And is it a team situation? You can see that. You can't hide it when guys like playing with and for one another. That is something I'm very interested in, and it's a great part of spring practice. And it could be one's, the own determining factor here, but it might be the most important part of spring is that chemistry, because you got new guys coming in, especially with the portal being so big now, and that's the way it's going to be now moving forward with college football. Do they play hard? Do they play consistently? Is there chemistry, route combinations, blocking effort, all of that? You should be able to see it. And it's the same on the defensive side. When I say skill, keep in mind, there is no harder skill than playing corner. It is not natural to run backwards while a guy runs right at you and tries to beat you. It is completely unfair in some ways, but that's just the way it works. That's why you have to see what they have now. They're moving some guys around. Devon Wilson is he talked about in a press conference last week, he's going to play some of the nickelback / that hybrid spot. That is interesting because they used a traditional linebacker there last year. I don't know what the thought process is. I know they're short on linebacker for one, but they got demolished by SMU last year. And part of it, they didn't handle that area very well. Part of it, SMU just ran the ball on them. But you try different things in the spring. Maybe this helps alleviate that. Maybe Devon is good off the edge as a blitzer, all kinds of things. So the skill talent on defense is just as important, if not more so, than offense. And again, depending on one's perspective, how do they mesh with guys moving around? They have a plethora of options on the defensive side of the ball in the secondary. Linebacker is a major concern. There is no depth there at all. They'll probably take 1 or 2 more guys from the portal. My expectation is the following. They'll move quite a few guys around, guys like Brandon Adams, the corner, who's at least 6'2". He's listed at 6'3", will get an opportunity to play and play well at not only corner, but they'll move him around somewhere else. That's just my own guess. I haven't asked. I haven't heard anything, but he's such a unique football player. You have to look at him in a little bit different light than you would somebody else because there just aren't that many guys that are that big that can run and jump like him. He's going into his 2nd year of college. Let's see what kind of progression he made. He's just an example, but he's a very unique one. Do they use him at nickel some? Do they use him in the slot? Do they use him in a middle of the field role? Or do they just say, you know what, he's just a good corner. Let's leave this young man at one spot and just let him maximize his skills there. I'm really curious about that because they all play off each other. If you get locked down guys like Brown, who's really kind of moved his game up, Adams is kind of learning his spot. You have Thornton. You have a lot of young DBs like that are still underclassmen. They were all freshmen and sophomores last year. Now they're going to be sophomores and juniors. This is a really good group of corners. Then you also have Devon in the back, and you have other guys that can move around too. Their chemistry is going to be interesting to me. And I guess the easy answer, are there any busts? Meaning, who the heck was that should have been guarding the guy running down the middle of the field scot-free and he caught a touchdown? Those are the plays that cost you football games. And if you see it in the spring, well, I'd rather be spring than an actual game. That's not a good sign. Obviously, you work on it in the summer and the fall and all that. But those are the things I want to see. So after that, there's one player that I've heard a little bit about, and coming into the spring, I didn't know what his situation was. Griffin, the receiver who's going to allegedly compete with Kobe to play the boundary spot. He's a junior college kid, didn't play much last year. He's from the state of Texas, very athletic. He's a long kid. I simply don't have a lot of information, but I'm very curious. I mean, as many of you probably know, because I've written about him a few times, Lee Hunter is the one I'm the most curious about on the roster because he plays nose guard and he's just a unique human being, period. Travis has talked about that with us in the press conferences, talking about defensive corner Travis. I mean, he makes no bones about it. Lee Hunter just moves guys. Can't teach it. Jaylen could be very unique too because they don't have a size kind of player. They lost a guy that scored 11 touchdowns from that spot last year. Brandon scored 11. That's a lot. He didn't even have 40 catches. It's just like 1 out of, I want to say like 3 out of 10, give or take, percentage-wise, or scores when he caught the ball. That's a lot. You need somebody there, A. B, you got to have rotation. If Hudson won the job, you still need somebody behind him. You got to rotate, and there's always a chance of injury. They need him to be able to play. There's a rumor based on what's been given to us in press conferences, Jaylen being one of them, talking about this kid can play. Jaylen Robinson, by the way, talking about it. I don't know. Again, I'm a glass half empty guy. You got to prove it to me. You got to prove it to me. I saw just a handful of clips with Lee Hunter, and I'd heard about him some, but I watched just a couple of clips of him, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. He's an NFL player. He will destroy the AAC this year. There is nobody going to block him one-on-one. I'm already done with that analysis. I don't need any more. Jaylen was my number 2 guy based on talking to another Jaylen Robinson during his press conference. Maybe he is the guy that they can use as the boundary. And again, it'd be great to have a guy that's 6'2" or taller out that spot. It helps. Back shoulder throws, end zone, jump ball, fade, corner, stop, fade, whatever you want to do. Size does matter in that circumstance. And hopefully, again, with that chemistry, he's one of those guys that wants to block for Isaiah Bowser. He wants to block for anybody that's in the backfield, JRP included. And, you know, they might do something where they just run a quarterback sweep, and he's the key guy to get JRP around the edge. That could be 80 yards. That dude can scoot. You have to block. The little things like that. I'm going to watch him quite a bit, and I'm just really interested to see what he does. Final piece. And I can't think of a spring game that I've ever watched on TV or in person that the following did not transpire. There's going to be somebody on the roster that I'm going to look down at my roster and I'm going to go, who the heck is that? He's made 3 plays already in this first half. Somebody's jersey number could have changed or whatever, but somebody makes a big tackle, really good block or whatever. It's just something new. It could be a transfer, but it could be a guy that was a freshman last year and redshirted. Who knows? It could be a kid that came off injury. It could be one of the transfers that came off injury, like Ware was injured last year. We don't know. Who shall that be? And maybe it's more than one. Spring games are unique. You just do not know. It's fun. It's interesting. And quite honestly, the options are just about as close to endless as one can imagine. The only thing that is really left is just to go see it. With that, keep in mind, it's still a spring game, no matter how well or how bad it goes, because there's offense and defense for the same team, essentially. There is no real winner. I don't care what score they go by or how they rank the game. I care less. I look at individual performances in effort and chemistry is the biggest takeaways because the coaches aren't going to show a ton, especially with Lindsey coming in. I'm sure he has some wrinkles that he wants to add with Gus. They know each other, but he's still learning. You're always evolving as a coach. They're not going to show a ton on offense. Why would they? They're going to run the ball, throw some short passes, maybe one deep ball, maybe one trick play or something fun. But Gus is known for that. And it's going to be more about the player, not the scheme, not the style, not the tempo, etc. So with that, please note that I'm going to try to get some more podcasts up this week in this regard. This was the broad one. I've been on the road a bunch in the last month or so. I haven't done as many podcasts as I'd like. But this week is really important. I want to talk a little bit about O-line this week, a little bit about D-line. I'd like to talk about linebacker, but they just don't have enough depth for me to even do a podcast on it yet. They need to get more additions before I can really have a full podcast. I need to see some of the guys too, and how do they use John Powell, et cetera, or something like that last year and get through. You were surprised. Is there a guy like that this year? Again, that's why this spring game is important. Who's the new guy? Maybe there's a walk-on linebacker that does something. I have no idea. You just have to wait and see. So with that, everybody have a safe day and be good. And I will see you at the spring game coming up this week. By the way, I am definitely going to be going around some of the tailgates and stuff before the spring game. So everybody be good. Take care.